This is You've Already Been Hacked, recorded on 10 July 2021. First, a small conceit on my part, but a thank you to everyone that's listened for the last 52 weeks. We have been at this podcast for 1 year straight, not 1 week missed. And thank you for tuning in for all of that time. Between my audience here and my students, who are semi-required to listen, it's why I keep doing this, so I appreciate it. On to the news. This past Friday, Kaseya, an IT software management company, a unified IT management software company, rather, was hit by ransomware operators that were exploiting a vulnerability in their update mechanism to push out the REvil ransomware package to the company's customers. Kaseya develops software for managed service providers, or MSPs, which means that this particular attack could reach out to hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations. An example of this is the Coop supermarket chain in Sweden had to close hundreds of its stores for 2 days because the point-of-sale systems that they use were impacted. Attackers of this particular event are demanding a ransom of $70 million. To the company's part, Kaseya says it began restoring software as a service on Tuesday, July 6th. One of the vulnerabilities that was exploited in this attack is their Virtual System Administrator software, or their VSA. And this was reported to the company earlier this year by the Dutch Institute for Vulnerability Disclosure. And they privately reported 7 security issues to Kaseya. 4 of the flaws were addressed in April and May updates. That meant that 3 were left and scheduled for fixing, but doesn't look like they got those fixed by the time they got hit. For the U.S. government's part, they are describing this as a supply chain ransomware attack, which it sort of definitely is, right? I mean, you have a provider of a managed service that multiple thousands of companies are using that are now all exposed, or at least were, if they've all done their updates by this point in the week. If those companies have not done their updates, the only advice that was given until the patches were available was to shut everything down. Shut the VSA server down and just figure out how to keep going without that particular managed service inside of your IT network. Examples of some of the other victims in this particular supply chain attack are 2 Maryland towns. The computer networks of Leonardtown and North Beach were impacted by the REvil ransomware. Neither town has its own IT staff, and both were infected through Kaseya's customer systems. Of note, there was another town that also had a cyber attack happen at the same time. I don't have, and I haven't been able to find information that confirms it's tied to this. It's just the timing is suspect, in my opinion. Joplin, Missouri's computer systems suffered a cyber attack where its phone lines and online presence were unavailable on Thursday, July 8th. 911 was still available, though, thankfully. Various city departments, including planning and zoning and the code enforcement, were doing things by cash and check only. So again, point of sale may be tied together. It's just something else that it's a pervasive attack. What's important to note in the attack, though, is that it doesn't look like, at least what's available for immediate research, that they exploited any code. They didn't compromise the code in the software. They did exploit a 0-day, which, as we all know, those are just human error, essentially, things that the developers just didn't check for, didn't think to check for, didn't know to check for, and they leave a gaping hole that someone's going to exploit. But wait, if you thought that of an attack on a managed service was a problem for 1,500 companies, and you've been sitting underneath a rock and haven't been paying attention, especially if you're in the IT sector, let's not forget about the Microsoft Printnighmare that affects all versions of Windows. What's fun about the Printnighmare is it is a remote code execution vulnerability in the Windows print spooler service, and it is being actively exploited. Now, the good news is Microsoft did issue an emergency patch to address this problem, so make sure you've done your Windows updates. And if you're in an infrastructure that has to verify and check and do all that stuff, you should have your department, your IT department, doing that now, like right now. You could even pause the podcast and have them go do that, and then come back and finish. The flaw was accidentally disclosed last week when researchers published a proof of concept code that they thought Microsoft had already issued a fix for. Oops. Microsoft acknowledged that the code that contains the vulnerability is in all versions of Windows, and until the fix was available, Microsoft was recommending that users disable the Windows Print Spooler service or disable inbound remote printing across the board. So if you haven't done your update yet, that's what you can do at this point. Now, there's some reporting out there that says that the patch itself that Microsoft did issue, that emergency fix, is bypassable. So I would take that with the weight that you believe it needs to be for your environment and your infrastructure. I would still do the update, because having the update is probably better than not. Sophisticated adversary that's going to care probably could get around it, but until there's a more robust fix, you may want to consider either disabling the Windows Print Spooler or disabling inbound remote printing as the most secure, air quotes used, options to you to fix this problem. So one thing we've talked about over time has been the escalation of the cost of ransomware, right? So we talked about what the Verizon data breach report showed as what the averages were year over year, and how they were slowly ticking up more and more until they got to 2020 and they jumped significantly. And here in 2021, they jumped way more significantly, right? So we had the insurance hack just a month or so ago, I think, if I remember that right. And it was, I think they were asking for 20 million, which was the highest single requested amount ever for one act of ransomware. And then now this attack that just happened, that we just spoke about at the top end of the podcast, they're asking for 40. Now, when that happened, when that first insurance hack happened, I actually said to colleagues, and I believe I even said on the podcast, this is now the new floor. This is where the ask from ransomware operators is going to be, and they're only going to go north because that insurer paid out, right? And the fact that they paid out means that the actors know they can get at least that much from places that have essentially the ability to pay it. So now we're going to see only an escalation because of that type of activity. And a lot of these actors, as we've talked about before, they're going to ask way higher, also known as the green line, right? That's your dream line. That's what, if you get that, that's awesome. They have a red line, just like anything else in negotiations. And so as long as they get anything above whatever their red line is, they really don't care. So if 20 million is where the baseline, the red line is, and 40 million is a good asking price above that, you get 21 million, you're still going to be very happy. You get 20 million, you're probably still going to be happy. That's still a pretty significant red line. So companies aren't just paying this out, right? Insurers are the ones carrying the brunt of this. And what we've talked about in the past is the insurance industry as a whole has a real problem on its hands trying to assess and quantify cyber insurance. Right? They have their packages out there. I'm not going to say that they don't have things. That's not what I mean. But it's very hard to quantify impact, loss, all of that sort of stuff that goes into a cyber event, unless that event has physical damages. That's pretty easy. So doing the analogs is what is really hard for insurance companies. How do we crosswalk this in such a way that makes sense financially and in a way that the customer will accept? So, to their credit, the insurance industry is taking steps on ransomware. In June, 7 major insurers for cyber events established a consortium called CyberAcuView, which will compile and analyze cyber-related data to enhance value and service to policyholders and help ensure a competitive market for cyber insurance. So they're coming together. Just this past month, the American Property Casualty Insurance Association, or the APCIA, published its cyber extortion and ransomware guiding principles. So they are finally trying to come together, very much like they have done with auto insurance and homeowners insurance and all the other types of insurance out there, to kind of figure out what this market really needs to be, and where kind of that happy median for X over Y cost versus protection is going to be kind of not regulated, but established across the industry. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And in our last story for our 1-year anniversary, it's not a good one. It's another supply chain attack this past week. The Mongolian Certificate Authority has been hacked, and such a way that the hack is distributing backdoored certificate software. The hackers in this are yet to be identified, but they have breached the website of MonPass, MonPass, one of Mongolia's major certificate authorities. And the hack installs a backdoor with Cobalt Strike binaries. The Trojanized client was available. We're only learning about this now, so take this for what it's worth, but was available between February 8th, 2021 and March 3rd of 2021, so almost a full month. The Czech cybersecurity company Avast, a major AV company, antivirus malware detection company, reported this out this past Thursday. In addition, a public web server hosted by MonPass was also infiltrated, potentially as many as 8 separate times, with the researchers from Avast uncovering 8 different web shells and backdoors on that particular server. So what's going on in this hack? Well, it's a little bit interesting. It's a little bit sophisticated, which means whoever came up with the software, not necessarily the actor, but whoever came up with the software, did it for a reason. So the malicious installer is unsigned. It's a portable execution file, so it's just a .exe most likely. It starts by downloading the legitimate version of what the end user would expect by going to MonPass's website, and it drops the legitimate version into the user's public folder and then executes it under a new process. This is to hide the fact that something nefarious is happening. The end user actually sees the result that they are expecting. What's interesting here is that steganography is used to transfer shellcode to the victim machine, with the installer downloading an image file, in this case a bitmap file, from a remote server to extract and deploy an encrypted Cobalt Strike beacon payload. How about that? I haven't seen something with steganography in it for a long time. That's interesting. To my memory, this is the second time, and only the second time. I could be wrong. If you know of another, please put the comments down below, or reply back and we'll talk about it. But it's the second time software provided by a certificate authority has been compromised to infect targets with malicious backdoors. In 2020, ESET disclosed a campaign called Operation Sign Sight, where a digital certificate toolkit from the Vietnam Government Certificate Authority was tampered with to include spyware capable of amassing system information and installing malware. So, how about that for the past year? At first, when I started coming up with the script and all that for this week's podcast, I was going to do this. Initially, I was thinking about doing this year in review, and here's all the major things that happened over the past 52 weeks. And then I told myself, why? It just keeps getting worse. I mean, and I don't mean that to be disparaging or to scare everybody. But I mean, the types of events that we keep seeing and dealing with week after week after week, it seems more escalated and more targeted and more impactful to wider and wider swaths of our digital devices. And I think that in itself is worthy of a 1-year anniversary to discuss, right? What can we do? Well, current advice looks like just to unplug. Maybe that's not necessarily the worst advice that they could give at this point, but we all know that's not really the reality that's going to happen. So I offer to all of you, stay vigilant with your IT usage, which may be less comfortable than you would like, but really, what's the alternative? Because you have already been hacked. That's all for the news this week. I'm your professor of cyber risk. We'll talk again soon. If you like this podcast, share it with your colleagues and friends. Your support is how we are able to continue to make this content. Thank you.